All right, sounds good. Thanks, Chris, and thanks, James, for inviting me to talk today. Um, just quick about me. I just moved here from Silicon Valley. I've been working at this startup called Yewno Inc. We're basically a knowledge graph company. We ingest a lot of data and then try to represent it in knowledge graphs, and we've put that technology inside of universities to help students research, and we've also applied it to financial trading systems that help investors make data science-based decisions about what they want to invest in. If you want to find my LinkedIn or whatever, you can find all my socials either on my GitHub or via my website. Both are posted in the chat. All right, so I'm not a big fan of PowerPoints. But I recognize the fact that we need to do some knowledge sharing, right? So the goal here is to, if you don't get anything out of this talk, what you will get is you'll get a reference to this repo, GitHub Workflows, which is broken up into different kind of, let's say, sections. And these sections will represent, I think, the three different things that I want to just discuss here today. We're going to start off with a little bit of boilerplate stuff with just the git-zsh library setup, what that is. I'll just briefly touch on it for like a couple minutes, and then we're going to go through this cowboy repo, or sorry, folder, which is basically just what are the everyday tools that you may or may not already be aware of for the junior audience. I think that's probably something that we should just touch on a little bit. And then finally, we'll get into the really fun stuff, which is the advanced workflows, which I think are some, maybe like Chris already mentioned, maybe that's something that you guys are already aware of, but maybe I'll give you a fresh take and at least you'll get to see somebody use a tool that you're familiar with in a new way. All right, so basically, we're starting off the tooling here is going to be, so my teaching style is sort of like I want to give you a mental representation at all times, a mental model, a picture in your brain. If you don't have a picture in your brain and I'm talking, you're not going to remember, I think, as well as you could if you had a picture in your head. So the image that we're going to set up here in terms of tooling is we're going to go to Home Depot, we're going to get some tools. And the tools we're going to get is this ZSH library. Now, there is some prerequisites here, and they're all defined in this setup stage. So let's open this guy up. And they're all markdown files, so they'll render nicely if you open them up in your browser. So we're going to set up ZSHRC, which is oh my ZSH setup is how you start this off. So if you go to this website, if you don't have this enabled already, then this is the installation instructions. It's very easy, very straightforward, and these links will lead you to a vast, giant encyclopedia of setup steps. So I won't get too far into it more than that. Once that is installed, the next thing, and this is where this ZSHRC really shines, is all of the different plugins. So these plugins are defined in a setup file. It'll automatically be generated. It'll automatically show up, and it's super easy to set up. And all you have to do to start opting into plugins is just define them inside of this parens list. So the point I'm making is that all of the shortcuts that I'm about to describe are all going to be available once you complete these two steps, ZSHRC installation and then the Git plugin activation. All right, so once you have those two steps finished, if we pop back over here, there is this really awesome resource, which is a cheat sheet. And this cheat sheet will send us to this Oh My ZSH Git plugin cheat sheet of aliases. All right, so this is basically what I'm acting as the curator of. This is our gallery, this is our art gallery, these are all the paintings on the walls, and I'm your curator walking you through, pointing at the ones that I think are most interesting and most useful for day-to-day operations. So if you want to go in and look at every painting on the wall, this is where you can come and look, and you can see the shortcut on the left, which is what you can type, and on the right is what the under the hood syntax is actually doing. Okay, so let's get into it. Any questions so far? Don't think so, yeah? If I'm missing any questions, just somebody ping me.
You're good.
All right.
You're good. No questions
Okay.
so far.
All right, cool. So let's go into the cowboy section. We all like to do some cowboy. This is kind of your escape hatch. So I broke these down just kind of as CRUD, as the mental model here. And some of this is going to be super simple and easy. So if we want to create a repo, we basically have two ways to do it. We can go into GitHub itself and we can make a new repo. I'm sure most of us are familiar with this by now. It's kind of the ABCs, but go to repositories, click new, right? And the main important ingredient here is after you name everything, you're going to get a URL. And this URL is going to act as your origin address, right? So your origin URL. Once you have this, you could, if you wanted to, you could do all of this generation of the PR through your CLI. And if you wanted to go down that route, and if you want to do it dynamically and you don't want to go to the browser, there's a link here that if you go to, you're going to get a bash script that you can customize. And what it's going to do is it's going to make a curl API call via an access token, your GitHub access token. And it's going to do all this fancy stuff. And basically, it's going to dynamically generate a repo for you. So you don't have to go to the website. So that's kind of neat if you want to do some bash aliasing and like create a function that would dynamically create that repo for you. So that's an option for you if you want to streamline repo creation. Anyways, after we do the repo creation, we need to attach our local directory to that origin URL, right? So we're going to attach that URL there. All right. Next is we have some deletion stuff. And what I mean by delete is removing branches and removing commits. So if you want to remove a branch, you can do it locally by GB. That's from our Git plugin. -D is just, delete and then my branch. You can delete the remote branch by basically specifying that we want to talk to the origin and then -- delete and then my branch. So these two commands back to back will completely nuke a branch and you'll never get it back. Alternatively, you can just go to the dashboard, you can open up the branches overview, and then you can just click these trash icons and delete them. That's also an option. The delete a commit. There's two ways to do this. There is an easy way and a hard way. The easy way is if the commit is the last commit that is on the branch, right? We may or may not be familiar with something called a head tag. A head tag points to the latest commit. And if we want to just completely remove the latest changes that we made to a commit, then we can call git reset head and then the caret icon. And that will basically take all of the commits, or sorry, all of the file changes at the latest commit and move them into the unstaged area. It's not deleting files, it's not doing anything, but just basically unofficializing the latest changes that we made. From there, you can just put them into a stash, meaning like throw them out of the current branch, but keep them off to the side because I may come back to them later. That's a super easy way to just pop off the last commit. The medium hard way is when there's a commit inside of my chain of history that I want to remove, right? So in this case, we get a little bit more complex. This is kind of one of our first kind of semi-advanced tools, but git rebase -I head tilde4. It looks a little scary, but if we break it down, basically what we're saying is we want to rewrite the history of our branch. And we're going to want to do that with the I flag, which is interactive, which gives us an interactive menu. And then the question is, well, how far back in history do we want to modify something, modify the branch? And we want to start at the head and we want to go back in time 4 commits. That's what that means. So it's actually kind of intuitive when you think about it. And so what you could do here is this is going to open up an interactive menu, and it's going to give you a bunch of different options that you can select, which are going to be things like squash. It's going to be things like delete. It's going to be things like modify. And it's really, really cool stuff. The docs are very extensive for this feature, and I included the link here if you want to get into it and dive deep. All right. Reading commits. All right. So this is actually something
Can I add
that,
a comment to the last thing you said?
yeah, sure.
For the -4, head -4 for that area, instead of doing that to go back 4 commits, if you know the commit hash you're trying to go to from where you're currently checked out at, you can just put in the commit hash as well. And that'll give you the interactive rebase for whatever you're at to that commit number.
Awesome. Yeah, good tip. Good tip. Okay. And then let's look at so reading repos. I'm sure we've all cloned a repo by now in our experience, but in case you wanted to use it via the Git plugin, if you don't have it already, you can just do gccd and the URL, and that'll just immediately clone the repo and put it into a folder on your local directory that matches the repo name. Now, if for whatever reason, let's say you've already cloned a repo and you check out a branch and you make some changes to that branch, or let's say your teammate makes some changes to a branch and you want to pull those changes down to your local computer, well, the easiest way to do that is just GFA. And that's just going to synchronize, it's going to get fetch all, basically, all of the changes that were made to the repo while you were gone, or since the last time you saw it. So that's an easy way to sync everything. And then finally, just real quick, the update. And the update is just going to be, there's kind of two updates that I could think of in this case, which is going to be, I want to rename my branch, in which case it's really similar to a Unix-based command, where the GB is the prefix in the Git plugin for just Git branch, and then MV is rename, and then the old name, the new name. And then finally, whenever you want to push updates to a fresh updates, let's say, fresh updates, not something that you've already pushed, but something that you're pushing for the first time, then GG push is a great option to opt into. All right, that's all of the basic stuff. Let's get into the fun stuff. Fun stuff here is going to start off with managing commits. And this is honestly the main inspiration for this discussion today. Was I was in charge of the front end team of about 6 engineers, and one thing that we started to really get annoyed by, and that started to become an issue, were finding bad commits in history, removing bad commits, rewriting commit history, working with the CLI when juniors are popping commits off left and right every 50 lines of code because they heard back in their early years that you're supposed to commit a lot, you're supposed to commit often, and you're supposed to push all the time. And yeah, that makes sense for a certain period of growth in your career, but at some point you kind of start to do things a little bit more strategically. And so that's kind of where I was trying to not try and tell them that they're wrong, because they're not wrong, but there's a smart way to do it, and then there's a naive way to do it, right? So let's start off with just making commits. Basically, this long blurb here is just talking about why you should think about writing commits that are a lot more meaningful and a lot larger. And the mental model that I was using for this was, think of a commit as a birthday, right? And when we have our birthdays, we like to reflect on how much growth that we've had. Our friends come and celebrate all of the achievements we've done, all of that, right? And so what you're trying to do in a commit, my argument here, is to provide meaningful information to not just yourself, but to your teammates. And you should assume in all cases that a commit will be reread in history. It will be looked at, and it will be a benchmark in your app's development to help the team understand, what is this code that I'm adding? What is its purpose? What is the problems that it's trying to solve? What were the challenges? It might be that I had several solutions that I had thought up and spent a lot of time working out, and I only had the ability to choose one of those options. And so maybe down the line, after I leave the company, It turns out that that option is no longer the best option at that stage of the company's life cycle. So maybe if the developers that I left behind could go to my commit and they could see, oh, okay, so he actually thought about this, he saw this issue, and this is why he didn't choose it, but he did see it. That's kind of the type of imaginary scenario that is super helpful to work around when your predecessor wrote a really good commit, right? So in order to empower you first to do this in a very simple way, because it sounds like a lot of work, to be fair, right? When I first heard about this idea, I was like, man, that sounds like so much work. So what I did is I created this snippet, and this snippet you can port into your IDE. Typically, snippets are universally structured. There's maybe some syntax differences, but if you use VS Code, you can copy paste this and go to VS Code and do a dead drop, and it will become a option that you can write by simply typing the letters GC. And I called it GC for git commit. And the scope here is going to define the files that this snippet will be available in. And so you can write this in a JavaScript file, a TypeScript, or a text file, or a Python file. So typically when you write commits, you're going to write it in text files. And so I know most of us are probably used to writing commits in the CLI. For example, we write git commit -m and then some message, right? What I would encourage us to think about doing instead is if we write GC in our CLI via the GitHub plugin, then what will happen is we'll get an automatic IDE, which if you set it up in a certain way, you can have it open up in your favorite IDE that you use every day, or you can have it open up in a GitHub specific IDE. And in there, you can write the commit message in the verbosity that I'm talking about. So in order to kind of structure it and streamline it in a way that isn't arbitrary or random or, isn't accidental, you can standardize the way the commits look. And so if you use this snippet, copy paste it, type GC in the CLI, then the text document opens, you type GC again in the text document, and then this text layout right here, human readable format, will automatically appear. And then from here, it's just a simple matter of filling out the details. If you're working on a Jira ticket or something like that, you could put your ticket number here. That was the convention that we used at my current company. And then we write the shorthand description of what the ticket's supposed to do. We start off with this as just a warning, basically saying, hey, if you're trying to look for a branch or a commit that is production ready level, like production ready and has no issues and everything's been tested, then don't look at this commit. That's what this means. But you could delete this, obviously. You can just, highlight, delete, whatever. But all of this is just kind of where you start writing stuff and making points. This is kind of the main thing that I think if you wanted to get out of today, this is, I think, the golden nugget of today. For anybody that's junior or mid-level, I would say that you can demonstrate an extremely high level of value as an extremely easy win, or let's say low barrier of entry, by doing things like this at a company, right? Any team that you're put on will highly value this level of clarity and commitment to helping the overall team. All right, enough of that. So, sorry, let me just, this is an example of the type of commit message that I've written in the past and what it might look like. You can also add to-dos, things like that. This is what it looks like rendered, which if you continue to follow this markdown formatting, then I don't know if you know this, but GitHub will automatically parse your markdown into parsed markdown, so it looks visually appealing. And then the other benefit to this is that if you break up the commit message into the title line here, and then one break line, and then the rest of all of the information, you can do things, for example, like use some Git plugins like GLO, right, which is Git one line, and looking at all the commit history. And you'll see that, you'll see that all of the commits have a title, and they don't have all of that extra data, right, that we added because it's broken up. in order to see all that extra data, you got to look at a single commit message. But the point I'm making here is that you're not polluting the ability for you to just quickly see the commit titles. You're preserving that ability. Amending commits. So this is the simple command that you can add to just, hey, I want to change the verbiage, I made a typo, etc. If you want to reset a commit, we already talked about this, you just use the reset caret. What that does is it pops the head off, and then now the commit is sitting in the staged area, and the head has been dropped back one step. I see we're running a little bit low on time, so update a commit. This is basically talking through step-by-step process of the git rebase steps and the git reset steps. So that gives you a little bit more verbosity there. And then cherry picking. Yeah, so cherry picking is one of the really fun tools, I think. The mental model here is, let's say you have this type of branch where my formatting is a little off on this file. I have to fix that. So let's say you have this branch. It was the original branch. And let's say it was just kind of like a brainstorming branch, right? You checked out O, and then you started building on top of O, and you just were messing around. You're not trying to be super production level ready. You're not writing tests. You're just experimenting, trying to get a fully fledged idea finished. Okay, so that's your rough draft, let's call it, right? And now your boss is like, hey, where's that stuff that I asked you to hand in? I need a PR. And you're like, okay. So then you go back to this branch and you're like, all right, well, I don't really think I need Y. I don't commit Y. I don't need commit Z. So let me go ahead and just take the head commit and let me take that X commit and let me make a new commit, or sorry, a new branch. So the best way to do this, in my opinion, is to check out O, and these are the steps. I'll fix the formatting here so it's easier to read, but it would be to check out O. I'm going to cherry pick X, and then I'm going to cherry pick the head commit. And now I can combine those two sections of my old PR and my old branch and make a new branch. And then I can submit this for peer review. And so that's kind of the benefit of cherry picking. Super clean, concise way to just take what you want and leave what you don't want. How are we doing on time, Chris?
We're just about at 1 o'clock. So I would say, if there's one more bit of
Okay.
what you've got together here, I would pick the one that you want to hit, and let's jump into that, and then we'll shift into Q&A.
Okay. Pick a good one. That's bisect. All right, this one's easy, and this is one that happens all the time. So basically, the problem here is I'm working on the same branch that my coworker's working on, right? Or my teammates working on, and they push up some changes. I have an old copy. I make some changes, and I try to push up, and I can't push. And the reason I can't push my changes is because I'm out of date. Right? I didn't get the information that they pushed up. So they basically, is the mental model here is Bob works at company Z, but then he gets fired or laid off. Now he doesn't work there anymore, but he's the only guy you know. So now you need to basically say, okay, I need to resync my phone book to figure out who's Bob's replacement, because I need to talk to his replacement. So what you can do here is you call GFA to sync your branches. And once you sync those branches, you now have the updated phone book. And then what you're going to do is you're going to rebase your branch, your copy, right? You basically, what rebasing is it's overwriting your history of your current branch with the history from the update. And so now the histories all look the same. And then what it also does under the hood is it takes all of your changes and it adds them to the end of the history. And so those are basically, it looks like you're building on top of someone else's changes, right? And then finally, what you can do at this point is you can push, and this will work. If you want to think of it in more concrete terms, the control flow of the commands is something like this. You push, you get an error, and that means you can't push, so you sync, and then you rebase, you're rewriting your history, and then finally you try to push again, and everything gets back up to remote. That's one of the most common use, daily issues that you kind of run into there. Yeah, that's probably a good stopping point. There's a bunch more in here, guys. They're all kind of broken up and tried to be highly presentable, so feel free to dive in. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take any questions, or you can reach me on Discord or whatever.
Awesome. Thanks, Toby, for walking through that with us. And I've got a lot of questions queued up myself. A lot of different thoughts too. I mean, and I'll hold off on getting deep into like fish versus Z, but I think for me, I've been using fish, so I have like a similar sort of round of optimizations that I've done for my workflow, just slightly different acronyms and all that sort of thing. But I think I really appreciate some of the mental models you put here, and just the attention to what's what I think of as just like a core bit of most any contemporary developers tool set. And I think the lots of us, I'm sure, have run into the rebasing challenges and the when to force push and when that drives people crazy and when not to do it. And so much of that comes from, talking with your team and figuring out what works for them and what doesn't. But I think just that idea of like writing the meaningful commit and like thinking of it as like a birthday, I thought that's just like so it's so like crystal clear, right? And that is, it got me thinking just in terms of how I view commits typically, which like I use TIG a lot of the time locally, or I'll use just git log even. But if you go into GitHub, right, and you're looking at like the history of commits on a given repo, they give you that one line summary, but you can't actually see the full like expanded commit messages one after the other, which is sort of annoying in this context, right? Because it does sort of limit you to, you've got to have that summary in that first line in a way that like really gives people enough information if people are using GitHub primarily for the interface, which sometimes that's where you are. But I'm curious if anyone on the call has like a workaround on GitHub to get it to actually expand all of the commit messages. That's like one of those things that might be buried in the docs, but I have not seen it. And I think the maybe to pull it back to the story, sort of the initial impetus for this. I'm curious how, the lessons learned and the modeling, how that went with the rest of the team, because it sounds like you sort of led this effort, right? Were there people who were quick to adopt and other people who had more trouble, or?
Yeah, there was definitely a little bit of pushback from minority, but they were asking like, why is this so important? I don't understand, and I'm like, well, the reality is that you're not going to work here forever. And ideally, we would build a successful company such that you don't need to work here forever for the company to be successful, and you get to move on to greener pastures, and so do we. And so what that means is we try to do this 2-week, notice and knowledge sharing typically whenever somebody's leaving the company, and that we're planning for, and they try to download everybody on the team with everything that they know. And it's sort of kind of really inefficient, and it would be much more efficient if people were knowledge sharing as they go. And so a commit message is a perfect place to knowledge share as you go. And so that's kind of the message that we were trying to impart to everyone. And it also, like, I don't know, even if you're not on the team yet, or if there's some, people that are looking for their first job or something, but you're building a lot of projects. I don't know how many times like I have 190 repos, but most of these are like, tiny little tiny proofs of concept projects that I don't remember, what I was thinking at the time. I don't remember the challenges that I was really faced with, etc. And if I don't have good commits, then I'm not going to remember that. I have to kind of go reread all of the code. So it's kind of just doing yourself a favor, even in small personal projects. Kind of journaling your way through your code.
Right, right. And
So,
having it be in the repo rather than in some other place, right? So,
So I've
Yeah.
got a
um,
question. You do this on every single commit?
ooh,
I mean, some commits, I use that template on every commit for sure, because
Okay.
it's a 1 or 2 second process to just generate the template. The
Yeah.
template, though, will have very huge variety of verbosity, right? Some days it'll be a couple lines, some days it'll be a giant paragraph. You know what I mean? Like the example that I used in this slide was an extreme example, right? They're definitely not always that large, but they
Because
could be a lot smaller.
I've been, and I'm not as disciplined about this as I should be, but I kind of do pref like tend towards a more like hybrid approach where it's like whatever I'm doing on my working branch, whatever, if I have like a feature branch or whatever, like I
Hmm.
may be doing smaller commits as, 'cause I like to do commits where it's I start introducing changes and then once I get it back to the code back to like a non-broken state, you know,
Hmm.
um, that's when I like to do a commit
Yeah,
and then write down what I did. But like for the more verbose stuff, it's like all these smaller commits are towards a feature and they may have info that I do or do not need. Um,
exactly.
but like
But that's
when I get to the final thing where it's merging in this branch, that's where like you do like a squash merge, right? And you
exactly.
can do like a big long commit message, and then you have in your main branch, you have a like really well documented, like and like
Exactly.
kind of you put then all your commit messages are really in the context of the like larger picture that you're working
Mhm.
towards with them, right? Instead of like, oh, like this commit was just to like bump a version or like,
Yeah, exactly. At work, there would be so many times, right, where like you go to stand up and somebody says, "Hey, I have this issue. I'm looking for some help." And you're like, "Okay, well, send me your branch." And you're like, "Okay, but it's like it's not really finished yet, and it's kind of messy." And like, yeah, yeah, no worries. Just send me what you got, you know? And some people are like, "Well, I don't really know how to do it. Like, it doesn't even compile, you know what I mean, or something like that." And so it's first you got to kind of help them realize that they can either stash their changes and then, or they could just throw everything in a dirty commit, right? You can just
yeah,
just commit everything you got and just commit everything you got so I can see it. And then when I get it, I'm gonna check out a new branch and I'm gonna call it fix with like my initials as our convention and then that way you can have your branch. I'm not gonna work on your exact branch. I'm just gonna make my own, and then I'm gonna work on some things, and then whenever I think I might have a solution for you, I can make a PR and I can point my PR to your branch, and then it kind of looks like my changes are super tiny, you know. But people won't feel comfortable with that type of workflow, which is hyper effective and easy way to get help until they're, solid on the basics of just how to commit dirtily, like in a dirty way, so that way they can then commit cleanly later. How to rewrite commits, squash commits, combine commits. Think of commits more like as, yes, they can be birthdays where we're celebrating a lot of achievement, but they could also be, mom telling you to go do the dishes. It's like these tiny little micro events that happen all the time that eventually you'll clean up later and combine into one giant thing. If that makes sense. But Yeah, I think you're completely right, James. You can think of commits too in these stepping stone kind of ways where okay, I knew the error changed. I knew I got a little bit further. So let me make a commit real quick. So if I change something after this, I don't regress, or I can not have to solve that problem from scratch all over again. And then I'll clean all of that up later. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll do dirty commits if I need to like get stuff shareable, right?
Right. Exactly.
I have a question on that same idea of kind of, well, having a bunch of commits and then when you want to release it to production, just having like one meaningful commit. So earlier you were talking about cherry picks, which by the way was very helpful because I never really understood why it was called that.
Mm.
Uh, but then I guess in my mental map, I'm still missing what exactly will be different between cherry picking a branch that I made and kind of like only keeping the result or like what my final commit looks like versus squashing all my commits together and making a pull request with that.
Um, if you squash all your commits together versus cherry picking, you're keeping every change that you made in a squash. Whereas in a cherry pick, you're leaving some changes behind because you're saying, I don't really need that actually. I tried something out, and yeah, it's not really important. So cherry picking is for when you want to not include all of your changes. Squashing would be that everything that's getting squashed together is implicitly including everything. Now, there are some cases where if you squash, the reconciler of Git will automatically know, hey, there's a conflict here. Like you're trying to squash stuff, but it means that I got to delete something. So what do you want to delete? And it'll ask you that, and you have to answer that question. So that might also be a way that you leave a little bit of code behind, but you're not really leaving it behind. You're kind of replacing it with something else. So to answer your question in the most concise way, I would say cherry picking, you're explicitly leaving some changes behind. You're saying I don't need those. And squashing, you're saying I need everything, but I just want the commits to be like unified. Does that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's interesting because I did think about asking about squash merge too. I like how you have a format for each commit. I'm curious like how you can decide which one you are going to use if you guys are doing squash merge.
Mm.
So your question is, how do I know what to squash together?
Yeah, like I assume that in this format like every commit will be meaningful. But I'm just curious
Right.
like okay, if we are merging two master, how do you decide like which one is
Yeah, that's a
the
good
main one?
question. Well, the one thing about squashing, right, is that uh, here, let me just maybe it's easier to demonstrate, but as I figure out how to demonstrate, the thing about squashing is you're in the interactive menu, you're going to be given all of the commits messages right there, and you get to either remove some, because what it'll do is squashing is actually going to combine all the commit messages together. If you don't change it, if you don't want to update it. Now you can go in and you can kind of pull out, like, there's been times where I'll have these really giant commit messages, like 5 in a row, but I want to squash all that together to make one unifying idea. And so there will be like some bullet points I'll cherry pick, so to say. I'll copy paste some of the bullet points and I'll combine and condense everything. But the point is that where I draw the line personally about squashing is singular ideas, and those can be defined as features. Like it can be, I need a, it can be as small as saying I need to add a loading icon to this button text, so that way whenever the user clicks this button, they see a loading icon, right? That could be a unifying idea. That was my goal. That was my objective. I achieved it. This is the code that does that, and these are the commits that overlays on top of. So let's combine those. And it can be as complex as saying, hey, I want to build an entire API, control flow from front end to back end, and I want it to do X, Y, and Z, right? If that's your idea, that's fine. Just make sure that you explain what you're doing, what your objective was, what were your challenges, what were your possible solutions besides the one that you chose that might work in the future, and explain all that in the commit. And that's the type of commit where if I'm reviewing it and I'm saying, all right, dude or lady, your code is giant, it's huge, you got 1,000 lines of code here in this one commit, and your commit message is tiny. That's not going to work. You need to explain what you're trying to accomplish, and it needs to be worth 1,000 lines of code changes. If it's a smaller code change, like a couple hundred lines or something, then I wouldn't ask for that. So it just depends on what kind of information you want to convey, and is the information sizable to the objective that you have. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense because, like you say, we are not going to stay in a company forever. So I think it's important to make sure each commit makes sense for people who don't know anything about the code base.
Exactly. Yeah, and for yourself too, right? Because maybe
True.
there's been projects that I was lead developer on at work, and 2 years pass and I forget a bunch of stuff,
Well,
and I'm
tell me
like,
about it.
oh man, I don't want to reread all this stuff, and then I go back to my commits, and my commits are like re-downloading my own brain, and I'm like, oh yeah, super helpful that way.
2 years long, I couldn't remember after like 2 months, to be honest with you. So
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I suppose go for it. Sorry.
Oh, just a minor reminder. If you are squishing commits, you can also go the other way. If you learn Git interactive rebase, you can reorder commits, you can split commits, you can squish them, and so on and so forth. So that's something to consider in all of this. And when you're squishing or squashing commits, my suggested way is squash to an atomic level where you can describe the commit message should describe what did I do in this and why did I do it. Once that's done, then leave that commit alone. And when you're doing a PR, in my opinion, it's fine to have however many commits it's necessary to describe what or to do what that commit or pull request does. So for example, I'm adding a feature, but the feature consists of 3 different things, and you can have 3 different commits for those 3 different things. Something like that.
got it. Thank you.
Yeah, the get rebase -I command, if you haven't used that much, it really is a great one to play around with because it's very powerful, and you can I didn't catch your name, but like the previous speaker was just saying, you can reorder commits, the commit messages. You can reorder the commits, but you can also take the commit messages for a bunch of commits and combine them into one shared commit message. If you're squashing them all down and then you want to keep the messages from those and put them into one big commit message, it makes it pretty easy to do that. And
reword messages from old commits, like say 10 commits prior to the current thing you're working on, and so on.
Oh yeah,
very,
totally.
Very useful.
When the commit message is like not done,
or
right.
auto commit.
Yeah. And one of the things that was interesting about this talk for me, Toby, is I was anticipating you might touch on overcommit or like other sort of more I suppose either that sort of tooling or some of the like Git flow sort of overarching ideologies or approaches to managing a code base. But I think the tools and the problems that you put together here are a little more open-ended and prompt.
I kind of just wanted to empower the belief that if I have the right tools, then my limitation is more or less my creativity, right? And my knowledge of the underlying environment. So, I can go to Home Depot and I can buy every tool that some expert says that I need to build a house. And as long as I have those tools, I know it's theoretically possible that I can build a house. Mm-hmm. Now I just need to know what is the knowledge I need to build a house.
Right.
And so I assume that a lot of us have a lot of that knowledge, maybe not all of the knowledge, but we probably have quite a large chunk of that how to build a house book already in our head. Some of us might have more than others, but it's a matter of time, right? And so what you may not be aware of is that, like, why does this book talk about this tool, or what is this tool useful for, and what are the most common tools, and how might I use this tool in a way that I didn't think about in the past? And once you gain confidence with your tools, you're going to be super confident that you can build anything you can think of, right? So my hope is that this PR and whatever happens to it in the future is, or the idea that I would want to seed in everyone's mind is, if you know your tools and what those tools can do, you can do anything. It's just a matter of time.
Well, and it's also a matter of collaboration, right? I mean, you can manage your repo however you want when it's just you, but when you're working with a team and you have onboarding and offboarding concerns, the way everyone uses the tools and what the sort of how you, not just like what is the contract between everyone, but like how is it negotiated and how is it updated? And I think having communicative, not just communicative PRs and issues, but actual commits is a very helpful component of that. And it is sort of interesting. It seems like, I suppose partly just because typically commits are happening on everyone's machine. But we have templates for issues and for pull requests and other things that GitHub sort of made a standard for. But commits, there is a way to like set a config and have a template sort of generated. It looks like, but it hadn't actually hit me before to do that, and maybe I'm just a little slow in that regard. But I came into software development from like a technical writing background, so it's double shame on me for that. But
as far as like workflows in terms of how many commits should we include, etc., like these, I think, questions are really about company culture and team dynamics, and what does the team feel is best for them as a group. If there's a lot of juniors on the team, then the answer is going to be different. If there's a lot of seniors on the team, the answer is going to be different, right? Because we're all holding each other to a different level of accountability about what we need from each other to work most effectively. So, yeah, I kind of steer clear of trying to impart cultural principles and values in a unified broadcast way, because it's not necessarily applicable to everybody's situation. But there are definitely best practices, right? There's definitely, certain things that I think any company culture would agree with. And so.
Well, and I think also it's just the point you made about having clear communication especially in asynchronous communication, to have that as like a real great way to add value to a team, whatever your, skill level. And I think it's something that, it's great to have this sort of overview and this sort of guidance here, but it's also sort of challenging in the regard that when I'm doing the commit after a long day, it's like summoning the energy and the will to go in and like put in the link and write it up in a way that makes sense. It's that last little bit of work that can really make all the difference 2 years down the line when I'm debugging some awful, bug, or worst case, someone else is debugging it, right? So, right. And those sort of soft skills, those sort of pain points for teams, that's so much of what software development ends up being about, in addition to, like which Git aliases do you want to use? Maybe more so,
really,
right?
just like this is the tool. Git is the tool that we use to keep ourselves accountable, right? Accountable to each other, accountable to ourselves, accountable to the company. I mean, it's tracking everything we're doing. It's tracking how we're doing it, how we're thinking about it, etc. So, yeah, it's the more comfortable you can get with those workflows and the ideas that you can convey, you're only going to enrich your team, right?
Yeah.
You can never be too good at Git. It's one of those skills that is just extremely rewarding, because you add so much value to the team. And once, if you really know what you're doing, there's a guy at my last company who, I mean, I swear he probably read the entire documentation of Git just for fun. And so, like, there'd be so many times where, like, head of engineering would come down and come find this guy and say, "Hey, Joey, how do I do this?" You know?
Right.
And he's like, mid-level engineer, but he was just super good at Git, and he's
Yeah.
getting singled out and asked, "Hey, by the head of engineering, can you help me?"
Yeah.
Like,
No.
that's a
Yeah.
super valuable resource. So if you want to find an easy win, right, an easy resume bullet point brag sheet item, like, you can never be too good at Git.
No, that's for sure. And but it's also like that every single junior dev who's 6 weeks into their career puts Git as a competency down, right? So it's like proving that and what it means actually is a different thing. And sort of along those lines, I think the format for the material that you have here, I could see it evolving into something where it's like here are some problem repos, that you then have to like go in and fix up
Yeah,
after the commit history is all garbled up or what have you.
yeah,
Um,
totally.
Sort of like the way
Yeah,
they
I mean,
do
I
like
would.
OPSEC stuff or pen testing or what have you.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I think it would be super cool to just see, whatever people's workflows think are interesting, if it were added, or, open a pull request, and we just write a good commit. Otherwise, I'll complain.
No, totally. Well, I think that's probably a good place to leave it unless anyone else has any burning questions. Great talk, man. Really appreciate it. And
Yeah, thanks for letting me share.
our pleasure. And so we'll have another talk a month from today. In the meantime, we'll have 4 editions of the newsletter. And thanks again to everyone who's come out for the first time. If you haven't already, do drop a little note in the introductions channel if you want. We're a friendly group, and the more the merrier. So thank you all again, and have a lovely Wednesday. All right.